Hello and welcome to the Dinosaw for week 36, another 7 curious interesting things I saw last week. As ever, let's crack on. First one is 2D to 3D goodness. Now this is actually via text prompts, as you'd expect these days. So this is MVDream and it is a multi-view diffusion for 3D generation. So I explain what that basically means. It uses a generative algorithm to create 2D things and it then turns those into 3D and textures them. So if you really want a four-legged robot, then it will create that for you. Now it's not perfect. Obviously, if you are a 3D modeler, then you will notice all sorts of wrong things with these. However, for you and I, or if we're trying to create something really quickly, we just need sort of a sense of what an object might look like, then it might be quite useful. So as I say, not perfect. If you look at some of the spinning dogs at the bottom, for instance, the one on the right, you'll notice there's a lot of weird purple stuff coming out of the back of one of the dog's heads. That's not normal. So, but this is a really interesting paper, so go and have a look at that. And there is some GitHub code as well, so if you really want to go and do this yourself, then you can. So that's very exciting. The right to repair campaigners are going after McFlurry machines in the US. So this is based on the fact that something like 1 in 3 McFlurry machines in New York State does not work at any point in time. Now this is because there's something just basically wrong with the machines and there's only one company, the supplier, who can fix them. The error codes are very difficult to actually figure out what they are. Now what you're seeing on screen is iFixit, who are notorious for doing teardowns and showing you what's inside things, showing you what's inside one of the machines, and it's ultimately very fixable. So the right to repair campaigners in the US are going to the Librarian of Congress, which you're allowed to do every 3 years or so, and say, like, we'd like these changes. So they're going against the basically the Digital Copyright Millennium Act and saying this should not be an offence to take something apart and try and fix it when it's ultimately very fixable. Now, if this goes through, and apparently the previous times that they've actually put something in front of the Librarian of Congress, it's gone through. So if this does go through, then this is quite interesting for businesses. Because if you could now have business owners or franchise owners, or even just random people, part of the public, fixing industrial machines, then that gets quite interesting. So if you are a producer of machines and there are unlicensed people fixing the machines, that creates some both positives and negatives, shall we say. But we'll watch that one like a hawk, because that could be quite interesting. These are trajectoids. That's a new word, by the way. That's not just a science thing. Now, these are three-dimensional objects that follow paths relatively accurately. So you're seeing on a lot of these slides, you're seeing a line that we're trying to follow, and then this 3D object that rolls automatically by itself along that line and traces it out. And apparently there's almost no line that it can't actually trace out. So what's going on here is the way they're discovering these things. If you've got sort of a soft ball of clay and rolled it along a line, then the ball of clay would actually take the form of the line and would roll along it itself. So there is an algorithm on GitHub. You can now go and download that, and it will generate the 3D shape for you, and you can 3D print them and you can play with them yourself. Why would you want to do that? Not really sure. These could be probably used in robotics. If this was a bearing interface between two surfaces, then those two surfaces can be moving in very interesting, intricate ways. But there's also some talk of using these in some way about quantum spin, because quantum electron spins, you can do sort of computations using different spins of electrons, and the quantum spins can be maybe influenced by this research. Who knows? If you're anywhere in that research, then this is maybe interesting to you. Other than that, these are just cool things, and will probably make a nice desktop toy next Christmas. This is Hyper 3D. Now, Hyper 3D is a kind of world creating platform. You can create these 3D worlds. I'm not going to use the M word, but you can see where this is going. Now, if you are a brand or an individual, then you can now just basically use text prompts to make your ultimate environment or your experience. So there are places where you can get 3D things created through text prompts, but they don't do the gaming part of it as well, and the physics. So you're seeing here, somebody saying, look, I'd like a castle. And this is the interface you use. It's a text interface. I'd like a castle, but I'd like some outbuildings. I'd like it to be bigger. I'd like there to be some fire, and I'd like there to be some sort of defense in the tower or something like that. So that's how it will work. So it makes these environments much easier to produce. Now, it's all going to be down to that conversation you have to create it. However, these are apparently also embeddable, so you can create your worlds, and as a brand you can then embed it possibly within your 3D environment or within your website or wherever that needs to be. So Hybrid 3D is kind of interesting. This is research out of Korea, and there is a silicon, or they created a silicon kind of squidgy robot thing that can move. Now it can move by basically expanding and contracting, and on one side there's like a spline that makes it sort of move. Now this is kind of, they've shown how it actually works, and I think it's hilarious down at the bottom. That sort of red image down at the bottom is this kind of cool little thing which can kind of walk along. If you show it different types of temperatures or whatever, it expands and contracts, and therefore can walk. It can run away, it can maybe do some scouting, it can do some spying, then run away, and then if you then expose it to certain temperatures or possibly even UV light, then it can then just turn into an oily puddle. So I thought this was interesting anyway, but then it led me down a research path of quite a lot of, I think there's some government research, and quite a lot of defence contractors have been looking at how do you destroy chips, or how do you destroy aeroplanes or drones, for instance, that can then fly into a zone and then can just disappear. Or maybe there's a chip that needs to be sent a Wi-Fi signal to then self-destruct or release chemicals or overheat. So I thought that was quite interesting, how there's this research going into how do you destroy something on demand. And, you know, there are probably products around it. You think that's probably going on. There's a printer over here, which is probably going on at the moment. So I thought it was interesting how manufacturers can destroy their products on demand. Now, this is Gaussian Painter. This is kind of cool. This is the coolest thing at the moment. So you're probably hearing Gaussian splatting quite a lot. And this is just another example of that. Now, Gaussian splatting, I'm not going to go totally into it. I mentioned it last week, but it's a crude way of getting quite quick renders of things, but using 3D point clouds. So if you imagine, you can see on the right hand side, imagine there is a cloud of painterly strokes, and how you look at it, for instance, can then regenerate these different images. So it's kind of interesting, but the algorithm is actually really, really simple to put together. There's some examples of it there. So this was actually, I saw this from Alex on LinkedIn, who is one of the founders of reshot.ai, which allows you to kind of manipulate photos. But this is a really interesting way of this kind of point cloud being used for artistic purposes, and how you can train it to do kind of cool things. So weekly we're seeing new ways of using this type of technology, and this is just the latest one. So it's not exactly perfect, but it looks really cool. And finally, if you're into your Atari 2600s, if you remember this when they first came out, and I'm old enough to remember these when they first came out, in fact I've still got one, then they are Atari, the official manufacturers, are actually recreating the Atari 2600 Plus. So the great thing about this one, it does have widescreen, so it will fit on your TV, but more importantly, it does have HDMI. So if you've got one of the original ones, it has a UHF connector, and you have to twiddle your TV. Most TVs can't do that these days. So it will play your old Atari cassettes or cartridges, and it also has this kind of 10 of the best games that you can then play yourself. So there you go. If you'd like one of those, they're not actually that expensive. They're about 80 quid, I think it is, and available, and I think I'll put the link at the bottom. If you're in the UK, it's available on Amazon. And you can order that, and it seems quite reasonable, but there you go. In no way affiliated to that, but I think that's pretty cool. Hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully it was useful. If it was, give it a like. As I said last week, if you'd like one of these in person at your business, then do get in touch. Other than that, I'll see you next week.